microphone working? I think it is. Can you all hear me in the back? Okay, good. All right, I don't have a really loud voice, so that's important. All right, thank you, Danielle, for introducing me. Thanks to you and Tom and everyone for organizing this call today. And what I'm going to try to do today is to give you some quick information all about electronic cigarettes or vapes. Try to distill it down into the top 10 things you need to know. And before I begin, I do want to thank my team at the Center for the Study of Tobacco Products here at CU. There's a lot of people involved in this group looking to try to better understand e-cigarettes and other non-tobacco products. And of course, I also want to thank our funding and point out that our center is federally funded. All right, so first of all, why should you care about this topic? Presumably you're here because you'd like to learn more about e-cigarettes or vapes. But I understand that you could also just be trying to make it to lunchtime. So I'll tell you some reasons that you should care about this topic. So unless you've been living under a rock, e-cigarettes or vapes have been in the news over and over and over again. There's lots of Juul. I'll talk a bit about Juul. So here's an article in the New York Times, another article in the New Yorker. Again, a lot about Juul. Washington Post. Here's an article about a proposed e-cigarette ban in San Francisco. They actually banned all flavors in San Francisco. Another article from the New York Times about e-cigarettes and their use in helping people quit smoking. So lots and lots of stories in the news. Oh, and we also hear a lot about e-cigarette batteries exploding and people ending up in the ER. That does seem to happen with more frequency than I would like. In addition to the news, well, we hear a lot about Juul. I'll talk about Juul, but we hear a lot on social media. So Juul has been very active, particularly on Instagram. So here on your right, you can see one image from Instagram, but there are others. So here is an image just on Instagram about all of the Juuls and other e-cigarette devices that were confiscated at one high school. Kids get really creative with this product. So here's, again, another hiding Juuls in a book. This is one of my favorites, so hiding Juul in a Sharpie, again, so you can use it without being detected. If you're looking for more images like this, you can go to Instagram and look for the hashtag #DoItForJuul or DI4J. Or if you don't have Instagram, I don't do Instagram, but I found out you can just Google this, Instagram and #DoItForJuul, and there's all kinds of horrifying to me images. Okay, but you might be thinking, that's great, Allison, that's the news, that's social media. Could you actually show us some data about this topic? And I can, I like graphs, so I thought I would show you a graph. First of all, I want to start out with past 30-day use of cigarettes among US high school students. And what you're looking at here is data from the National Youth Tobacco Survey. This is a nationally representative survey of young people in the United States. And they first started collecting data in 1998, and they do this survey every year, every other year. So what you're looking at here first is past 30-day use of cigarettes, and this is any young person who's used at least one cigarette in the past 30 days. So the percentages have been going down over time, which is really great. It's really great to see all the work that people in public health have been doing to reduce cigarette use among high school students. Then here's e-cigarettes. Or vapes. And they just started measuring this in 2011 because e-cigarettes or vapes really only came onto the US market in about 2007. But you can see there's been a huge increase in past 30-day use of e-cigarettes among US high school students. It went up for a while. It seemed to level off a little bit in 2016 and 2017. We were wondering what was going on. And then in 2018, huge increase. So really big increase. So now e-cigarettes or vapes are the most frequently used tobacco product among US high school students. And does anybody want to take a guess as to why in 2018 there has been such a huge increase? Any one particular product that maybe might be responsible for that? Yeah, I think probably Juul. I don't have proof for that, but that may be why. Okay, so that brings me to point number one. The first thing you should need to remember about e-cigarettes is that use has increased tremendously, particularly among young people. Now, you do see increases among adults as well, but it's just not nearly as dramatic as what you see among young people. Okay, so the second thing that's important to know about e-cigarettes, if those statistics were not disturbing enough by themselves, there's more and more research coming out showing that young people who initiate with e-cigarettes are at risk for progressing to combustible cigarette smoking. And this just isn't one research study that has shown this. It's study after study after study after study showing the same thing, that there is this risk for these young people. Many, many studies. So that's really disturbing because, again, everyone has done so much work to try to reduce combustible cigarette use among young people, and the fear is that those rates of combustible cigarette use will start to go up. We don't know yet, but that's what people are concerned about. Okay, third important thing to know about e-cigarettes or vapes. This is a class of products with many, many different names. So e-cigarettes or vapes are not one thing, they are many different things. So here's one image. This actually is kind of an old image by this point from a couple years ago, just showing the variability that's out there. So on your left, you can see e-cigarettes that some people call cigalikes. They look sort of like a cigarette. This is what you might find in a convenience store or gas station. But then there's all different other kinds of types of e-cigarettes, all different shapes and sizes. Here's another image from a recent Surgeon General's report, again, just to show you about there's a tremendous variability with these products. Then, of course, there's all the newer e-cigarettes like Juul, Swarin, Fix, Bow, that are smaller. They look a little bit different. But what all of these products have in common is that they consist of a battery and a heater, and you put a liquid into the e-cigarette. The heater heats up that liquid, it creates an aerosol, and then the user inhales that aerosol. So lots of differences across products, but that's basically what they have in common. Also many, many different names. So I've been using the word e-cigarette. I think that's a term that a lot of adults or scientists use. Young people definitely don't use that word. So they might say vape. They might talk about a vape pen. They might refer to their Juul or using juuling as a verb. You might hear mod or box mod, pod mod to refer to some of the products like Juul, e-hookah. Again, all very similar. They're all working in a similar way. And then I even heard from Danielle a couple of nights ago, a new one, a mango stick. So I'd never heard that before. So the kids are calling these all different things. So many different names. You're probably aware that these products come in many, many different flavors, very enticing for young people. And they also come in many different nicotine concentrations. So you can buy liquid to put in your e-cigarette that has 0 milligrams of nicotine or no nicotine, although that's not very usual. And in fact, a lot of the liquids that are labeled 0 milligrams actually contain nicotine. So the labeling is kind of a problem. So you can buy all different nicotine concentrations. You can also get a gallon of nicotine at the 100 milligram solution. Or if you've got $8,000 lying around, you can get a 55-gallon drum of nicotine at the 100 milligram level, so you can make liquid in your bathtub, which people do. And I did check this website. This is still available out there. Actually, the 55-gallon drum has come down in price a little bit, so just FYI. Okay, number 5, very important point. E-cigarettes can deliver nicotine. So nicotine, you may or may not know, is the dependence producing or addictive drug in tobacco products like cigarettes, cigars. And it's particularly dangerous for young people because it can alter those developing brain pathways. So I'm so thankful that Dr. Hudziak gave such a nice introduction to the developing brain, but we don't want to add nicotine to that developing brain because it can cause all kinds of problems. We know from some work in our lab as well as other labs across the country that some e-cigarettes can deliver as much nicotine as a cigarette or even more nicotine than a cigarette. And it really depends on the kind of product that you have. So the kind of e-cigarette you're using, what kind of settings it has, the concentration of nicotine in the liquid that you put into the e-cigarette, how you puff on it. So if you take a longer puff, you're going to get more nicotine. Makes sense. All those things affect nicotine delivery. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about Juul and show you some information from Juul Labs, the company that makes this product. So they say that their pods contain 5% nicotine, which is about the same as 59 milligrams per ml per pod. We've done testing of their pods and actually find levels that are much higher than that. And they say that's about the same as a pack of cigarettes. I have no idea if that's accurate or not. But what I wanted to show you is some data. They actually did a study where they brought in cigarette smokers. they had them take 10 puffs from a cigarette and they measured their blood levels as they were using it. Then they had them come back another time and use a Juul, take 10 puffs, so the same protocol, and they measured how much nicotine got into their blood. So let me walk you through this graph. What you're looking at here on the bottom is time and then how much nicotine on the side. So the red line is how much nicotine they got from a Pall Mall cigarette, and the purple line is how much they got from a Juul. Again, just 10 puffs in both cases. So it might look here like Juul is delivering a little bit less nicotine than a cigarette, but it's actually about the same. They're not statistically different. So even the company is saying that Juul can deliver as much nicotine as a cigarette. Okay, so besides nicotine, e-cigarettes can deliver other toxicants and other drugs too. So e-cigarettes aerosolize nicotine, flavorants, and also propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin. And that's what makes that big cloud, the propylene glycol and the vegetable glycerin. And those are the propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, and flavorants are ingredients that are fine to eat. And in fact, they're in a lot of our foods and a lot of our medicines. And they're not considered dangerous when eaten. But they weren't intended to be inhaled. And so when you heat up some of these chemicals to really high temperatures, as you do in an e-cigarette, other chemicals are formed, like formaldehyde, which is a carcinogen. And it depends on the kind of device you have, the kind of liquid that you're putting in there, how you puff on it. But there are other toxicants that are formed. And there definitely are other drugs that people put in their e-cigarettes, cannabis most notably, but also MDMA or ecstasy, cocaine, opioids, and others. So I hope I have convinced you it's not just water vapor. So and your friends or your kids tell you, oh, Mom, it's just water vapor. It is not. There are all kinds of chemicals in there. All right, so seventh thing to know about e-cigarettes, the short-term health effects of e-cigarettes or vapes are kind of mixed. So first of all, they don't deliver carbon monoxide, which is a good thing. Carbon monoxide is a toxicant that's in combustible cigarettes. It's been implicated in cardiovascular disease. It's also very bad for a pregnant woman because it decreases how much oxygen is in your body, and so it decreases how much oxygen is available to a developing fetus. Carbon monoxide, oh right, I said cardiovascular disease. So e-cigarettes, so far, it doesn't seem like they deliver this, which is really great. Also, some of the carcinogens that are present in cigarettes are present in e-cigarettes, but in much, much, much lower levels. So that's also positive. However, there are adverse events that have been reported. So certainly there's been an increase in calls to poison centers and ER case reports. Sometimes little kids get their hands on the containers of liquid and drink it because it, smells like Fruit Loops and end up in the ER. Interestingly, the FDA just recently came out with a warning about some e-cig users who are reporting seizures. And they're not exactly sure why this is happening, but it could be due to nicotine toxicity. So getting so much nicotine that you actually have a seizure. There have been case reports of several kinds of pneumonia where the physicians believe that the patient's pneumonia is directly related to their e-cigarette use. And of course, we hear about exploding batteries. So those are some of the things that are not so good. And then even more concerning to me is that every week, it seems, I'm reading a new article about respiratory effects of e-cigs, like wheezing, and also cardiovascular effects, and it's not good news. So again, it's a little mixed in terms of short-term effects, but certainly I have some concerns. Long-term effects, we have no idea. So we don't know what happens after people use these for 20 or 30 years. I'm certainly concerned about the respiratory and cardiovascular effects, but we don't have really long-term data on this because the products have only been out for 10, 12 years. Okay, so everybody also wants to know this. Will e-cigarettes help me to quit smoking? And I can tell you maybe. So it might or it might not. This is a very controversial topic, so I can tell you that when I go to conferences, there are scientists on one side who think that e-cigarettes are a panacea and it's going to help everybody quit smoking. And there are scientists on the other side who think it's the worst thing ever. And it's really just not clear right now. It is a really hard question to answer because there are so many different products out there and so many different combinations, so many different nicotine concentrations in the liquid. So it makes it a really difficult question to ask, something that's very difficult to study. But I'm going to try to walk you through a little bit of the research that's out there, and you can try to draw your own conclusion. So some studies do show some positive results. So there was a recent study, you may have heard about it in the news, it was just out there in the UK, where they gave some cigarette smokers an e-cigarette. They gave some other cigarette smokers a nicotine patch, which is an FDA-approved therapy for smoking cessation. Everybody got, I think, at least 4 weeks of intensive counseling. And they found that a year later, 18% of the people in the e-cig condition had quit smoking compared to 9% in the patch condition. So the authors were really excited about this, doubling of quit rate. But overall, most everybody went back to cigarette smoking. So there's another trial, I believe this is an ongoing trial, where they looked at highly motivated smokers. So smokers who were really, really motivated to quit smoking. And they found that more participants who were in e-cig conditions, so they were given an e-cig with nicotine or even one without, a placebo, they were more likely to quit than people in a control group. That's also positive. And some other authors did a meta-analysis. This is where they're bringing together the results from many different studies. And they found the overall cessation rate of 13 to 23%. Again, most people seem to relapse to smoking, but seems to be some positive numbers in here. Another study looking using US survey data showed that people who used e-cigs, that was associated with more quit attempts and more successful cessation than people who didn't use these products. And then there's several studies that show that people who use e-cigs daily have a greater likelihood of quitting smoking compared to people who don't use them at all. So those are all some positive findings. On the other hand, there are studies that show less positive results. So there was a study done in New Zealand a few years ago showing that they gave some people an e-cigarette to quit smoking, some people got the nicotine patch, and the numbers were about the same, and almost nobody quit smoking anyway. Some other researchers in the UK looked at the population level between use of cigarettes and cigarettes smoked per day, and they found no association at all. Another interesting study, I think this is also US data, they found that e-cig users were more likely to quit than people who'd never used these products, but they were also more likely to relapse to cigarette smoking over time. And then there was another meta-analysis that came out a few years ago. Again, they're bringing together data from lots of different studies, and they concluded that e-cig users were actually less likely to quit smoking. So are you confused yet? Right, it's not clear, we don't know. I remain hopeful that the right kind of device paired with the right kind of person, perhaps a highly motivated smoker, could help some people to quit smoking. But right now it's not clear. And in any case, even if that is an effective, or if that is an effective therapy, I think it'll be important to then get people off of the e-cigarettes as quickly as possible. Again, because we don't know what those long-term effects are. Okay, so last point, number 10, regulation is coming. So in 2009, President Obama signed the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act into law. This was very exciting because before then, there was very little regulation of the tobacco industry, and they could pretty much do whatever they wanted. So this, at that time in 2009, it gave FDA oversight over some tobacco products, including cigarettes, and they put some rules into place at that time. And then in 2016, e-cigs and some other tobacco products like water pipe were covered. And I can tell you it's very, very slow, but the regulations are coming. So the Food and Drug Administration does have the power to do things like restrict the marketing of e-cigarettes. They do have the power to do things like eliminate flavors altogether. It's just really slow. One thing that they've been threatening to do is to restrict the sales of flavored e-cigarettes in convenience stores. So if they go through with this regulation, then when you go to a convenience store, you won't be able to buy mango Juul pods, but you will be able to buy mint or tobacco-flavored Juul pods. And you'll have to go to a vape shop to get the mango ones. So the idea is to reduce access to young people. Okay, so conclusions, and this is the point. If you've been just sleeping or checking your email, or maybe you've been on Instagram looking up #DoItForJuul, pay attention. Okay, so number one, e-cigarette or vape use has increased tremendously, particularly among young people. Even more concerning, youth who start or initiate with e-cigarettes are at risk for progression to cigarettes. All these products, it's a class of products, it's not one thing, it's many things, many different names. They come in a variety of different flavors, a variety of different nicotine strengths. They can definitely deliver nicotine. They contain other toxicants for sure, and they can contain other drugs. Short-term effects are kind of mixed. Long-term effects are unknown. They might help people quit smoking, or they might not. I don't know. And regulation is coming. It's just coming really slowly. So I'll stop there. I hope that you learned a little bit that you'll maybe retain.